in making. We've just been told we're being recorded, so that's for the sake of friends who can't be here. So I hope you don't mind that this is being recorded. Anyway, I'm here because I was invited by a gentleman called Danny Ben Moshe to participate in a documentary film about my father and something my father might have done here in Australia. And I'm the family Yiddish expert, even though my Yiddish is very far from perfect. I can read the language. I've been returning to my roots in my old age. I've been participating in a daily Yiddish schmooze with friends in Jerusalem, started during the COVID lockdown. Also, we've been having a weekly gathering of people who are in Habonim via the Zoom. So I've caught up with old friends in that framework who went to Melbourne High like I did and were in Habonim as I was. The title that we've given this talk is Past, Present, and Future. I hope we have a future. It's worrying. I'm talking about us as a globe as well as Palestinians and Israelis, Arabs and Jews in the Middle East. Human rights for Jews and Palestinians. I already have a question, and I'm sure there are different answers, because once upon a time we used to talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict. And we've gone over to talking about Jews and Palestinians, and that is a change which I think has been a result of changes in the area, the development of stronger Palestinian nationalism, the notion that a Palestinian is not a Jew, even though there are Palestinians who are Jews. Usually Palestinians, people who've converted to Islam or Christianity. And to make it Jews versus Palestinians, we're saying something about who's in the conflict and not including people who are involved in this conflict who are not Jews. There's a significant community of Druze who put in their, they decided within Israel to support the creation of State of Israel, serve in the Israeli army. There are Bedouin who've done that as well. There are Christians and Muslims in Israel who see themselves as Israelis. So should it be Israelis and Palestinians, conflict between two national groups, or should it be Jews and Muslims, a conflict between two religions? Why has it become Jews and Palestinians? That's interesting. And that's the politically correct expression used today. And, we hear a lot about politically correct. I think I'm pretty politically not correct. In various directions. That's one of the dilemmas, Can you still be a Zionist and be on the left these days? That is very difficult. And what does it mean to be a Zionist when it's been hijacked by extreme rightists? Can you be for Palestinian rights without giving up your national identity as a proud Jew? These are overlapping issues. By the way, I would add that the conflict is not only about Jews and Palestinians. The Christian world is very profoundly involved. And I want to mention, even though I abhor the way political leaders use, both here in Melbourne and in the United States and in Israel, use the issue of anti-Semitism, but I believe anti-Semitism is very real. And I was responsible for a number of years, for a decade, dealing with volunteers who came to Rabbis For Human Rights to help, to work for Palestinian rights in one way or another. And I came across a phenomenon which I would call anti-Semitism. Having said all that, I'm begging questions already, I think. Let me use some of the material I've prepared. I was looking at the Australian Jewish Democratic Society's old, website, and I want to put in a plug. When I come to Melbourne, even though there are differences of opinions on different things, this is my political home, this organization, and I think it's very important in the Jewish community, even though in some sense, it has been shoved or pushed aside by the mainstream Jewish community, which I think is one of the most right-wing communities in the world. I know there's a significant Bundist element, and there are liberal Zionists, but on the whole, the community, and I might be wrong because I'm a guest. I've been in Israel now for 47 years. On the whole, the dominant groups seem to be the right in these days, and also the religious community, particularly I think Mizrahi is very strong, going back to Libla days. That's a comment on an outsider who's remembering. It's a very strange experience coming back to Melbourne, because you're coming back to a place that doesn't exist anymore. I remember very clearly Australian racism. Now, if I say on the Shabbat table to my family, my niece, whose room I'm in now, I say, I think Australia is racist, she is shocked. But I remember, like many people here, the White Australia policy. I remember when Aborigines were given the right to vote, or native Australians. I'm not politically correct, I'm out of date in Melbourne, right? And I'm stunned by the announcements everywhere about this was the land of this tribe or that tribe. And I wonder, is that ever going to be possible in Israel? There is a group in Israel called Zachor that's pushing, let's relate to the Nakba, let's relate to displacement of Palestinians. But, the conflict between Aborigines or native Australians, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and the white Europeans, and now other races and colors have become part of mainstream Australia to some extent, is over. The Europeans conquered the land, and I don't want to upset people too much, but I think they performed to some extent a genocide. And, I never grew up meeting Aborigines in my little Caulfield bubble, or even the city center and so on. Anyway, those are just some thoughts, some questions. So looking through, I came across someone that played a role in a very important experience to me. And I should tell you, I'm going to be talking micro more than macro, because when it comes to macro, yeah, I live in Israel. I read the papers avidly. I've been involved in lobbying in the Knesset and so on. But when it comes to macro, I don't know more than anyone else here. We don't, I've had this discussion in Harold's dining room years ago. I listened to that discussion. Is there a solution, one state, two states? My wife pushes a line I think is true. At the moment, let's not talk about solutions. Let's talk about dealing with the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground involves bloodshed and repression and displacement and abuse. It also involves a lot of decent people. I don't know if you say both sides, a lot of decent people, and I'm talking about Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs that I know who really do want peace. And are very frustrated in that desire by the complex reality built around them. The other group, I was talking earlier about religions, I forgot myself, is the Christians. It took a long time for the Catholic Church to recognize Israel. I've had the experience in interfaith meetings of coming across theological anti-Semitism. Israel is a scandal, not only to the Muslim world, not supposed to be. The Jews are supposed to be a tolerated minority amongst peace-loving Muslims, to be correct. But Israel's a scandal in the eyes of many. Catholic Church has done a tshuva, has done work. The Protestants have not yet done that. It's a scandal in the eyes of Christian theologians and normal Christians who know their religion. And the idea that Jews killed Christ is still around. I have on the shelf, coming back from a visit, Debbie and I have gone twice to Poland, once with my brother, and Eastern Europe, where our family, my father's family in particular, but my mother lost many people, were wiped out, and came home with all these little souvenirs, which is a little chassid who looks like he's praying, but he's holding a coin. He's praying to money. And I had a little incident this morning, which is an experience of Australian anti-Semitism. But I don't know if any more people have the experience that I wrote into my novel of coins being thrown at Jewish kids because you love money, things like that. Or the experience of a group of Jewish boys having to protect the one boy who put a yarmulke on his head to say a blessing before he ate, as I experienced at Melbourne High. That's part of the background to my aliyah, but it's part of the background to my sensitivity in Israel also to Palestinian rights and other groups, having experienced being part of a minority with that historical memory. And I'm not the only one. There are thousands like me. I mean, our group is small. There are about paying members. There's been like reorganization. We have 120 paying members in Rabbis For Human Rights today. The majority group are Reform rabbis, a significant group of conservative or Masorti rabbis like myself, and a very small group of Orthodox rabbis who have the courage to really swim against the stream. Anyway, Orly Noy, that's the first thing I wrote down to. And so Orly Noy is a journalist that came here to Melbourne, and I think she was banned from certain places, and you wrote that up in the Australian Jewish Democratic Society website. And she's a very hard-hitting and significant Mizrahi, not the political religious group, but Edot Mizrach, Sephardi journalist, who I took out, as I did in the years when I was out in the field every day, to a place called Khan al-Ahmar, which was in the news. Khan al-Ahmar is basically, Ahmar is Arabic for red, the red stopping off point. A Khan is a place where you had a little water for the camels passing through. It was a place where people rested, maybe slept the night on the way into Jerusalem from somewhere else across the desert. Khan al-Ahmar is a Bedouin encampment of a group called the Ja'alin Bedouin, who we've been working with for many, many years. And we helped build a school there. Probably the most important personal experience I had was to go out with a bunch of volunteers and help build a school. And that school has been standing since 2009, even though it immediately got a demolition order. And it's still standing despite demands continuously to demolish from the neighboring settlement. And an amazing thing happened a few years ago. I took this lady, this journalist, Orly Noy, out to this particular Bedouin school, which I was very proud of. The kids there, some of them had not been learning at all, particularly the girls. The boys, there were 3 kids killed on the roads going out to Jericho, which is, half an hour's ride from there. It's between Jericho and Jerusalem, this encampment. And I took it to these little shacks, tin shacks, and basically buildings built out of rubbish. And they're penned in army on one side, army training area, or so-called army training area, because the army uses declaring an area a training area to prevent Bedouin expansion or settlement or use. And the settlement that claims that area also, even though in the books it was state land or it was unused land, different definitions depending if it's Ottoman, British, Jordanian, Israeli. That settlement is one of the wealthiest settlements. It's Kfar Adumim. It's, if you want, the exurbia of the very big settlement, Malay Adumim, which is more working class. Kfar Adumim has a swimming pool, won prizes for its interest in ecology. It's a very, progressive, advanced school. There's some intellectuals who live there. But the committee there of that settlement demanded the demolition after the building of that school, saying now they're not intense, they're building something permanent, and they don't have a right to build there. I took Orly out to this settlement. We drove into the settlement with this big sign about what a wonderful school it has. It's a settlement that prides itself on good relations between religious Jews and secular Jews. And you see all these little villas on the hill with their red roofs, having come from the shacks. And we pass through and go out the other way. And she's not shocked. She knows about the reality in the territories. I said, I have something else to show you, because they've been told they have to move. And where they want to put them is next to what used to be, 2006, it was supposedly closed down, used to be the Jerusalem City rubbish dump. And I took her there. The rubbish dump has pipes coming out of it, poison gases coming out, and 2 waves of expulsion of Bedouin from that same tribe where they expanded Malay Adumim were plonked there and promised, at least one of the groups has signed an agreement, grazing land. But of course, this is Palestinian owned land which the Palestinians don't build on because of the dangers. This rubbish dump was supposedly closed down, but it's still being used by Ma'ale Adumim. I took Oli Noi there, and I'm sometimes able to be to speak well. I have a gift of the gab or something, and I told her in Hebrew, "Po nigmar chemla." Here, how do you translate chemla? Here, empathy ends. And the context was what they're demanding these people go be crowded into a little ghetto there of Bedouin. And that line was the headline of an article she wrote, which someone from that settlement picked up on, a gentleman who is a doctor, the deputy director of Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. He pinned it on the notice board. And people in that community were shocked. What? We're nice white liberals, like some of the people living in Caulfield or Vaucluse or whatever. I don't want to be too cynical, or North Tel Aviv, right? And a group formed in that settlement that decided they were going to go visit the Bedouin. My friend Jeremy is also a rabbi, also a conservative rabbi, and I were involved in chaperoning, making the connection. And they set up a group to support those Bedouin. They started to lobby, settlers lobbying, not for a two-state solution or anything, just that we should be good neighbors. And there have been people volunteering there now to teach English to the kids, teach Hebrew, help them sell their dolls. So on the micro level, the committee still is demanding, their executive committee is demanding the demolition. But this group within that settlement have also been, I see Mark wants to, applauding, I want to say something. A couple of people have been out there, and I've introduced them to Abu Khamis. So that group went to court to argue against their own settlement. There's a lot of tension in the settlement, and they've been public that we should learn to live with our neighbors, which is a wonderful outcome of on-the-ground activism, which does not solve the issue between Jews and Palestinians on the macro level, but does something that I really believe in. And I'm a big fan of some of the teachings of people like Martin Buber and Abraham Joshua Heschel, an important rabbi for me, and Martin Luther King, that one should do what one can to humanize the situation. So that's one example. I hope someone, Harold, you're going to give me the time limit so we can open up for dialogue. And people are invited as I go to ask questions or if they want to say something. Maybe I'll show you something. Audio visual always helps, right? So we have share screen, and I'll share something with you. I think, first of all, about that, just to show you the school. This is an article about that school. Do you have on your screen the rubber tile school? That's it, built out of tires that the Bedouin collected, 2019. It's already 12 years, and so it's a primary school, so already 2 Masorim, 2 rounds of kids are finished and have learned to read and write. With regard to the girls, the mothers don't know to read and write. And there is one teacher in that school now who came from the Bedouin community, which is really wonderful and special. Okay, I just wanted to show you the picture of the place. You don't have to read the article. And you can look up the Taya School of Khan al-Ahmar, that's the name. Okay, the next thing, maybe I'll show you another thing that happened in that same settlement. It's a small movie, and I think it highlights the kind of things that go on all over the West Bank. Gaza is another story again that we, considering the recent conflict, I guess we should talk about, but this is where I've had connection and done things on the ground. So we won this battle. You'll see a small film about confiscation of, well, you'll see it. How's the sound? There's no electricity there. They pirate water from the water system. Now they've been connected, actually, even though it's officially a legal settlement. There are a number of so-called legal.
There's no sound. You forgot
No
to share the
sound? Now it's on.
No,
Oh.
you didn't share the sound.
Oh, sorry, you don't hear? No sound, my wife just told me. I'll put on the sound. Try to. Speakers, same as system. Audio settings. Sorry. Can you hear now? Harold?
No.
Can't hear. Look,
So
what?
Do you remember how to do share sound? You have to stop the share.
Stop the share.
Stop the share.
Yeah.
Then go back to the share screen.
Yeah.
Right, and then there's a little checkbox that you have to
Optimize
share computer sound somewhere.
Share sound.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks,
do it
darling.
again. Yeah.
Okay. We'll do it again. Okay. Before, there's solar panels for the school up on the hill. They've been here since 2009. Can you hear now?
Yes.
Great. You saw how the army shoved me aside there. I've had that experience many times.
الكهرباء من مقومات الحياة، لكن هون ممنوع حتى الكهرباء هون. الطاقات الشمسية زي ما انت شايفها للمرأة.
This is Abu Khamis. He's the brother of the sheikh who speaks pretty good Hebrew and was for many years the gardener of a neighboring settlement, Kfar Dumim, until they heard that he was using his tractor to help build the school, and then they kicked him out. They sacked him. And he's just saying we have these solar panels, and they've come and take them away. And Rabbis For Human Rights with a couple of other groups went to court over this. And those solar panels were returned. They were defined as illegal building. And the lawyer argued, no, this is personal property. It's not illegal building. One of them was broken and an attempt to sue the army. I want to point out the complexity. I mean, there is abuse. It's systematic abuse. It's, clearly different laws for people who are not citizens of Israel. But there's also the possibility, which I couldn't imagine in a real dictatorship, of arguing with the army, at least on the part of Israelis, of Palestinians being able to argue here and there like Abu Khamis does. Oh, sorry, I don't know what happened there. We'll go back. Anyway, you have the picture there. I just want to show, I asked Rabbis For Human Rights for material to say something about the organization. This is an appeal that's used to ask for money, but maybe give you some kind of idea as well. Just want to go back to the beginning and run the slides. There's a nice slide of myself that I like. This is a quote. We like to use biblical or Talmudic quotes, of course. And I want to argue that religion is a very, very important part of the complexity, the problems. I think in past years I've said something that I believe, but I haven't been able to see happen, is that religion could also be a voice.
Remember to do it full screen.
Full screen. I should ask my wife to stay here to help me out. How do you do full screen? I don't know. I'm just going to keep going. Now what happened? Atzaga. I got it. Okay, these are volunteers, Palestinians and American Jews, I think, planting olive trees in places where trees have been uprooted or where there's conflict over land, and the tree is both a symbol of peace, but it's also for Palestinians a symbol of their national pride and the notion of tzumud, which is like the Hebrew word samud, to hold on to the land. This is the village of Burin in North Samaria. And on the hill across the way is probably one of the most, if not the most extreme settlements, a place called Yitzhar, which is a constant source of violence. And Yitzhar is not one settlement, it's a string of settlements along a ridge. And that's often the case in settlements. They're on the hill and the Palestinians are in the valley. And we came there with volunteers to a place where trees had been uprooted to replant. This is our educational director, Rabbi Nava Chafetz, of Iraqi and Egyptian origin. Our current director, Avi Dabush, who was, I think, number 8 on the merits list. And he came from Bnei Akiva. He no longer wears a kippah. He's the gabbai of egalitarian minyan, and he lives in the strip around Sderot, around Gaza, and he was in his bomb shelter during all those all that rocket fire. But he is committed both to social justice for Mizrahim. He's also Mizrahi. We don't only deal with Palestinian rights, we're very concerned with social issues within Israel. And he's been our director for the last couple of years, and the organization has gone through a revival. And this is one example. This young man is a rabbi of maybe the biggest Reform synagogue or one of the biggest in Israel. We now have a younger leadership. After I retired to a year spent writing a novel, I rejoined the board. And Jeremy and I are the 2 old men in the board, but it's actually a young board with about 50% women also. This is something I've done, arguing, you saw that in Chanarach, by arguing with officers about right to access. So she has a map in her hand saying, look, this is land. You can tell what time of year it is too. See the red poppies or kalaniot, spring, right of access. It's their land. There's a lot of emphasis on the olive harvest. That's the biggest single event where we bring volunteers out to the field. A Palestinian woman who works for Rabbis For Human Rights, excuse me, Aisha. She works in Hadera in our social rights center. We have a center helping people suffering from poverty and problems with the government. The present Israeli government is really rah-rah privatizing and rah-rah, I know Samuelson is my day when I studied economics. These are the young gentlemen on the hill. They are not peaceful, and they have behind them an ideology which is quite extreme. They are a minority in their community, but in the outposts, they're the community. And they have an impact on the entire right wing, pulling it towards extremism. This is this is covering his name. I don't remember. I'm sorry. Let's go back. It's a local farmer. I wish I remembered his name, who lost trees. And this is what he has to say about us. It's great publicity. Rabbis For Human Rights provide needed relief for us through their annual harvest and subsequent planting activities. They give us hope and show us that there are other Israelis, not just the settlers that we encounter all too often. They come to us out of caring and solidarity. With their help, we're better able to maintain our orchards and provide for our families. Again, I know what someone's going to ask, and I don't have an answer. You might say this is putting Band-Aids on a political situation, which is awful. But, to look yourself in the mirror as an Israeli requires doing something about injustice. And apart from voting for Meretz or Chadash or whoever people in our group or Avodah vote for, this is what we can do on the ground. And we try and publicize the situation by talks like this one. And I should admit also that this is, I know fun is the right word, but I enjoy it. We have what we call a dialogue in the field, and we're talking to, my Arabic is not wonderful, but it's improved. I've taken classes. Some people here are students of Arabic and they get to practice Arabic, and we have Palestinian kids who have learned a little Hebrew and get to use it. And we live in a reality, we climb every tree for human rights. I love that. You can see I'm enjoying what I'm doing. It's not always fun, though. I mean, here and there, we've been attacked. This is a bunch of idealistic young Israelis protesting, I don't remember what, saying we want peace. That is a quote from the Bible, I think from one of the prophets, but I might be wrong. A meeting in the Negev. There are 42 not recognized Bedouin villages in the Negev. Some of them never moved. They've expanded. They have a lot of kids. You see, it's interfaith. There's a minister there. Muslims, Jews. Our social justice director is a religious woman, Becky, whose bat mitzvah was in our shul, Debbie and mine, and she's a wonderful lawyer who's also our lobbyist in the Knesset. It's all part-time. We're not a rich organization. Educational activities. We give talks to young people in schools. Again, I think this is to present interfaith. Interfaith is interfaith, not in terms of my religion is nice, your religion is nice. There are many interfaith groups, but it's interfaith on the ground. Gabi here is a Protestant minister of Augusta Victoria. She's German, and she's been at our Shabbat table many times. Very, on the one hand, she helps a woman that we spent years helping called Ibtisam, who is one of those Bedouin who were displaced next to the rubbish dump. But she is also not anti-Israel. She loves Israel and had herself given a job there to be in Israel. Her husband is a professor of Jewish studies, a Christian professor of Jewish studies. This is our social justice team. This is a secular rabbi whose name slips my mind. We're getting older now at the moment. I'll remember after the talk, probably. Again, this is inter-ethnic, right? Religious, secular Arab Jews together. And they're meeting people about their rights regarding employment benefits, social security, and such things. And I should tell you, it looks very sweet and nice, but we're talking about people who've had suicides. One guy burned himself alive because his support was cut. And there were massive protests a number of years ago in Israel on social justice issues. Okay, we sign petitions, we join other groups in doing that. We're often the group asked to add some kind of religious element, and I think that's important in Israel. So I don't know if I should read the words. Can someone tell me how are we doing for time? Should I read this or go on?
You've got 5 minutes left of your talk.
So I won't read it.
Start questions.
Okay, I won't read it, but it's we're choosing or finding material in our tradition, and there is plenty of it, in the direction of peace, swords into plowshares and all the rest of that. And there's no shortage, as there is no shortage of the opposite kind of stuff. I would argue that a religion is not up for grabs. There is a spine to Jewish religion, there is a Torah. There is only one God in the system. Even if you're a secular rabbi who rejects the belief in that one God, or nevertheless, that's central. 10 Commandments are central, and the land of Israel is central in the narrative. Okay, 5 minutes. Let me turn off the share. Have I given you everything? No, something very important to me, actually, because I said I talk about Rabbis For Human Rights, another group that I represent Rabbis For Human Rights in. And this is a wonderful man, a religious Zionist called Gadi Gvayahu. Dr. Gvayahu is like an agricultural expert. He's expert on chickens, but he's devoted himself the last few years to fighting racism. I'll show you a small film and then we can open up for discussion. And as usual, I don't get to everything I prepared. I'm very supportive of this group. I'm on the executive, and we work together. It's called Tag Meir. It's a reaction to what's called Tag Meir.
סיפורם המאיר של אנשי תג מאיר, אנשי הציונות הדתית,
שמנסים להשיב
מלחמה שערה על השערורייה הנקראת תג מחיר.
אנחנו עוקבים אחרי הרקע האידיאולוגי של האנשים שעומדים.
This is national television.
ההצתות כבר מדצמבר 2009. עם השנים ההצתות האלה נעשו חמורות יותר והתחילו לפגוע גם בבתים מאוכלסים. הספר תורת המלך. הוא בעצם הטריגר לכל תגי המחיר, הופך את היהדות לדת נקמנית, רצחנית. זה הופך להיות היהדות, זה דבר מסוכן מאוד. כדי להביע את הזעזוע, את הבושה.
חילונים, דתיים, אפילו מתנחלים אסף סביבו גבריהו, מגיעים לכל מקום בו בוצע תג מחיר, על מנת להראות נוכחות יהודית אחרת.
כל הזמן הוא אומר, תגיד לי, סבא, מה עשיתי כששרפו אותי? אני לא אמרתי לו שאתם נשרפתם, ואמא ואבא עדיין נמצאים בבית חולים, במצב קשה. הלכתי לבכות במיטה שם, שעות.
בשבוע שעבר החליטו להרים פרויקט מימון המונים כדי לסייע כלכלית למשפחה שעד שלא תוכר נפגעת פעולות איבה, לא תקבל כל סיוע כספי.
43 מסגדים, כנסיות, מנזרים הוצתו וחוללו ללא אישור של רבנים, זה לא היה נעשה.
הרב יצחק גינזבורג נחשב לסמכות הרוחנית הבכירה שממנה יונקים אנשי תג מחיר את ההצדקה ההלכתית לפעילותם. לא צריך להתאמץ יותר מדי בשביל לראות איך הרעיונות של הרב מתגלגלים הלאה.
אנחנו לא איזשהו פורום של שמאל. יש בינינו אנשי ימין, אז ברגע שאיש ימין פתאום אומר שהוא נגד לרצוח ערבים, הוא נהפך לשמאל. אז זה טרגדיה. אין להם אלוהים. אין להם יראת אלוהים.
Okay, I think you got the idea here. I'm going to turn this off.
אין לו יראת אלוהים.
It's the end anyway. Okay, stop share. As my wife just pointed out to me, Gadi, one of his sons, is involved in breaking the silence, and it's true, we have some settlers who come out, and these are religious Zionists that are pushing this, but these are religious Zionists who are really left-leaning, and they're trying to play that down to focus on one thing, and that is hate crimes, racism, and it's not only hate crimes and racism amongst Jews, which explains part of what happened in Lod and in other mixed towns, because some of these people have been bringing their activism, their terrorism into mainstream Israel, into mixed communities. But we've gone to visit synagogues that have been burnt, and visited victims of Arab terror also. And in answer to the question I'm going to be asked, as a rabbi and as a Zionist, my responsibility is first and foremost the behavior of my own people. And I think Hamas is a horrendous terrorist organization. I don't in any way or form justify shooting 4,000 rockets into one of the difficult things is being here during this time, right? My kids were refugees inside Israel in our home in Jerusalem to get away from being too close to the rockets in other parts of the country. But let's open up for discussion.
So I'm going to cross over to Harold. I don't know if you've been keeping any questions that you're ready to ask.
Oh, I see 29. No, I haven't looked. Sorry. Should I go back to the beginning and start rolling down?
No, I'm having a look through them now, because a lot of the comments are, some technical issues and me asking for people to give a small donation and other things. But I can see
there are two questions from Larry.
Yeah, I'm seeing one from Larry here that says, "How do progressives deal with the you are aiding Hamas accusation?" I'll leave you to comment on it.
I think the people aiding Hamas are the extremists on the Jewish side. I think we're doing exactly the opposite of what Hamas would like to see. They paint all Jews in their material as having horns and being evil. And we're trying to be human beings. And I think that's the biggest opposition you can give to a hate-based group.
Okay, I have a question. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the intrusion into the Al-Aqsa Mosque on, I think it was about the 7th of May. And it was one of the reasons I think that Hamas said we're going to be firing rockets into Israel unless you leave the mosque by a certain time. I think it was something like that. And And I'm just wondering, in a Jewish sense, what we think about the idea of intrusions into sacred spaces, such as this mosque.
Well, I was here just as you were. I did get bombarded with a lot of material. I've been busy with a film, and I haven't been able to keep up with all the emails and WhatsApps and so on. You're asking for a Jewish approach to holy places. There's material, definitely material in the Talmud about respecting the places of prayer of those who accept the idea of one God. But there is intolerance regarding paganism. So already more than 1,000 years ago, Maimonides had his doubt about Christianity. He had no doubt about Islam. He said, they believe in one God. They're all wrong. They've got the wrong ideas. And the only true prophet was Moses. But he says, they are monotheists. We should respect their holy places. And that has been codified. Any person in Chabad would be able to read that, including Ginsburg. Ginsburg wrote a terrible book. It's called Torat HaMelech. We went to court over that, and he covered his ass. It's all quotes, but he chose the most horrendous stuff, which is encouraging vengeance. Back to you, Harold. I'm letting you do the job of deciding what questions I answer.
So somebody has made the comment that the comfortable suburbs, I guess, like the settlements, to the shanty towns and sewage, sounds very much like South Africa. Is there something you'd like to comment about that?
In some ways, some people think that the reality, certainly in Gaza and in parts of the West Bank and Area C, looks like South Africa, but there's a different complexity. In some ways, since there's more abuse. In other senses, there's less. I mean, what the Zionist movement has done, or the Israeli government done, is gerrymandered a situation in which you have basically two populations which are more or less equal in this tiny country into, Arab citizens of Israel. They make up 20%. They might decide tonight who's going to be government, which is a wonderful and ironic twist, because they've been excluded and considered not legitimate. I'm talking about the Arab parties, and these are Israeli citizens, to those who are given some kind of in-between status, like the Palestinian population of East Jerusalem, and those who are under military rule, and those who are under like partial self-government. So it's not South Africa. It's the same human nature and the same phenomenon amongst them, the phenomenon of racism, the impact of fundamentalist religion, but each conflict and each reality has its own complexities. But yes, the running sewerage with the nice villas on the top of the hill is reminiscent of scenes from South Africa and other places where, colonial people have settled. The difference is, I think the Jews, and I'm willing to argue this, have a real claim to the place. It's not just a colony. 50% of the Jews came from the Arab world. And the Arab world did not make such a clear distinction between Palestine was created basically by the British because of their Christian notions about, where Jesus was from. And so, people lived in Cairo, in Damascus, in Baghdad as part of an Arab Muslim world, the Arab Empire, Muslim Empire, and Jews were a significant minority, like 40% of the population of Baghdad and the elite of Baghdad. And there were Jews involved in the early period of Arab nationalism and important Arab Jewish poets. There's a wonderful book written by someone who moved from the right to left, and that happens. It's a minority phenomenon about 1929, about the massacres in Hebron. And the settlers used that story. But, the Jewish community in Hebron, there are people living here in Melbourne. I have friends who came from Hebron. I think the Slonim were from there. It was very old, 1,500 years. And it was pushed out by Arabs in 1929, maybe partially as a reaction to Zionism, but that wasn't the whole story. It was also an element of nationalism. Nationalism is a dangerous thing, especially when it's linked with religion, and particular fundamentalist religion. I've already forgotten what the question was. I hope I've answered it.
I think you've covered it. It was to do with shanty towns and stuff. But
yeah, well, let me tell you one thing. One of the things you hear from some of these settlers is when we came here, the Jordanians had not put in sewage, and now there is sewage. And we don't understand why they're attacking us. They don't understand the Intifada. They don't understand that nationalism is, alive and well amongst Arabs living next to them.
I'll go on to something else, Yehiel. Howard Masorti said, this was in response to a comment that you were saying about occasionally you have success. You can argue with the army. You can take matters to court. And Howard said, pretend democracies allow dissent. It makes people feel better about the exploitation and persecution because some ground is won back. In the long term, the problem continue. Now, Ahmed replied, Howard, exactly. Sometimes they let Palestinians argue, but that doesn't change anything, no more than a placebo. So I just thought that was an interesting
those solar panels made it possible for those kids to do their homework, made it possible. It's weird. You have in shanty town, people have televisions and mobile phones. The problem is there. The problem is institutional. I agree. And there's a need for change. How long it's going to take, I don't know. Part of it has to come from politics. Part of it has to come from the ground. But, Israel's liberal democracy has not yet been shattered. 50% of the population want change at the moment, and some of them are right-wing. And, Israelis are traumatized by waves of terrorism. Palestinians are traumatized by repression. But I don't want to sound brutal, the Arab countries joined in the attack of Palestinian Arabs, if they were called that then, in 1946, who wiped out groups of Jews, and there were Jewish massacres of Arabs then under the British until the British held up their hands and said, we can't deal with this anymore. And then they invaded, and everyone wrote Israel off. In 1967, again, Israel had an arms embargo. The French stopped supplying weapons, and the Americans only started doing that after Israel had proved its power to defend itself. So yes, there's developed a colonialist phenomenon since '67, which is tragic, which has made this conflict that much more complex and that much more difficult to solve. Someone I saw asked, how can I say nationalism is a danger or combined with religion? And what I mean by that is a particular kind of nationalism, which is a triumphalist that excludes the other, or tribalism, and religion, which is of the kind that is also tribalist. There's also a notion of universalist religion, a religion that sees every human being as created in the divine image. That's in our Torah. It's in the Muslim tradition. It's in the Christian tradition. I think it's there in also secular philosophies. And human instinct tells us we're all, from the same monkeys, if you want. I'm not Orthodox, though I try and live an Orthodox life. I'm just not theologically. Sorry, yeah.
So Rosette asked, how do they get away with the violence? And I presume by they, she was referring to the settlers. And in fact, I thought that might be an interesting thing. How is it that the settlers are able to harass, if you like, the Palestinians who are living in the area? But if Palestinians were to in any way attack the settlers, the army would come down on them like a ton of bricks.
Because it's a military occupation, because the settlers have a political system behind them, they vote in elections, they have powerful friends, and they have sympathy on the part of some of the soldiers and some of the policemen, a lot of them, in fact. And the young people have moved to the right politically in Israel. But let me tell you a story on the other side, just to tell you what I've had to experience on the ground. I worked with a Palestinian field worker for 12 years, Zakaria Sadeh. And Zakaria's house was hit by a Molotov cocktail, not by settlers. He was threatened by settlers, not by the army. They don't use Molotov cocktails, by other Palestinians. Why? Because he's collaborating with the Jews. People should, I mean, that maybe that sort of thing went on in South Africa. It went on in all sorts of places where people, pushing for their freedom. But if you have a, what is it, zero sum total, is that what you call it, approach, you'll just have more bloodshed and no solution.
Just a comment from Larry, just saying there's accusations that Rabbis for Human Rights and others are colonizing and stealing Palestinian voices. And I'm sure Larry's being provocative in his usual style, but clearly there is a concern that in trying to represent Palestinians in some way, that you are robbing them of their voices. How do you respond to that? Okay, the number one item in our budget is education and not Palestinian activities in the Palestinian territories. And that education is focused on the human rights message of Jewish tradition to counter jingoism in the schools and the army. And I don't think we're using Palestinian voices for that. No, that's number one. And I think our behavior is focused first and foremost, even though we want to help people on the ground, at our fellow Jews as rabbis, to impact on their understanding of what Judaism should be or could be. Also, we don't work with Palestinians who don't want us there. We only work with Palestinians who've invited our help, asked for our help. And then we publicize what we do because we need the funding to continue doing what we do. I don't think that's colonizing someone. I think, yeah, they're extremists and purists, and they're the ones who've left the bloody river behind us through history, going back to Lenin and going back to all sorts of other purists. I'm not a purist, to me, being a human being is number one. And to me, that's God's message. That's what I understand God to be about. David Cohen quotes from the Washington Post this is from 2017. The European Union said in a recent report that there's been exceptional upsurge in seizures or demolitions of European-funded projects by the Israeli government, which faces pressure from Israeli settlers to shut them down. The report said Israeli forces have seized or demolished 117 European-funded humanitarian projects for Palestinians from September through February. I presume that's September 2016 to February 2017.
Can you tell me what the source was again, Harold?
It says here, it's a report in the Washington Post.
Yeah, but where'd they get the information from?
I actually don't know.
Let me say the following. It sounds true. There has been an increase under Netanyahu, and in recent times, because of him courting Kahanists even for his government, and also because of the nature of the American government. Trump was, whatever Bibi wants, I guess, when it came to Palestinian rights. It might change now. In the past, we had, and other groups had, an ability to share information with the American State Department. They closed the consulate that was dealing with, in East Jerusalem, was dealing with, these matters. Having said that, if the source is the UN, and I think the UN is a wonderful idea, and Jews were very involved in trying to get this off the ground. UN Declaration of Human Rights, one of the two authors was a Jewish lawyer from France, René Cassin. There's a school named after him which specializes in French, like my old school, Coalfield North. But if it's the UN, I don't trust them for a moment, from experience with the UN on the ground, right? They're not trustworthy. The UN is clearly biased. I'm saying this as a left-wing Israeli. I can give examples. The best example I have is from my wife's cousin, who was a journalist and worked for a while. He worked for Time, Newsweek, but then he worked for the guy in charge of UN unit, what's it called, UNRWA in Gaza, and he left in disgust. He said, they're a voice for Palestinians, and they don't see the other side. And all these condemnations that have gone around the world, and I think structurally there's a serious problem that needs change. But all these condemnations, a lot of them been very one-sided. I mean, my kids and grandkids had missiles thrown at them. So we're criminals because we developed a defense system that protected our civilian population from more slaughter. I mean, you know, that's not criminal activity, that's self-defense, it seems to me. The blockade is problematic. Control, you know, the same people are shooting missiles, their electricity is coming from Israel. It's limited, their water supply, you know, again, I don't know how these issues on the macro level can be solved, if they're solvable.
So that feeds very nicely into a comment from Mark Silver, who says, what can we do to support this micro pockets of wonderful work towards peace? E.g. music, but I'm not sure what that's a reference to.
Look, anything anyone can do to humanize a reality that is so bloody and bitter is positive. So supporting groups that are doing real things on the ground is a good thing to do. And, you know, Tag Me'ir, Rabbis For Human Rights, are happy to receive donations and support. When Corona ends or when things open up, come visit and see for yourself the reality there. And understand that, you know, Israel is not really, in my eyes, a full democracy, the only democracy in the Middle East. I can't stand that slogan, but it also is no dictatorship, and it's not South Africa, it's something else again. There is a structure of liberal democracy there in place. You know, one example that I've been reading about this endless detention, and Arnold Zabel's been involved in this. I read the book by that wonderful Persian Kurdish writer, endless detention. So we have a high court that, and it's a problem perhaps, but rules, and the right in Israel hates this high court on issues like detention. We have, you know, detention going back to British emergency laws where people can be incarcerated for 3 months, but we can force their release. And that's happened, and that happened with the African refugees or work migrants in Israel. Also, they were released when there was a public campaign. Things can change for the worse. They have been changing for the worse. There's a logic of conflict that pushes that way, but Israeli democracy, or what there is of it, is not dead. It's alive and functioning. 5 elections, maybe 4 we've had already, you know.
Yes, and there is the possibility of a new government being formed in the next few days.
Yeah, I'm praying because, you know, even though there are right-wing people in that government, so far as we know, they're decent, younger, at least in Bennett's sense. I don't buy into his policies regarding foreign relations or relations to Palestinians, but there's going to be restraint of those forces that want to close up shop of the High Court. There's going to be an end, I hope, to pressure on NGOs that Netanyahu has been responsible for. Maybe a little less use of hatred to stay in power. That would be a game changer. And the biggest thing of all is if that very fragile, if they form a government for the first time, no, I think Rabin also had this, so it relies on the Arab party to vote it into power, that could be a game changer. I'm really hoping that that will be the case.
Gail Nestle says that it's good to see you, and these cycles of terror and violence have predictable outcomes. So where do we go from here? And I'll just add to that, there's another comment from David Zinger, who says the only Jewish paper in Australia promotes racism and extreme views in the Jewish community by focusing only what happens to Jews. How do we respond?
Well, create an alternative paper. When I was a kid, there were 2. I mean, who am I to make suggestions to Melbourne Jews to deal with their reality? We've got enough problems there. You know, I as much as we need the support of the, you know, I don't know, Jewishly committed left in Israel, one of the things that goes on is that we're now a source of support for people in America on the left. I don't have an answer. You know, a Jewish tradition has a very powerful ethnocentric aspect to it. The creation of State of Israel strengthened that. But, you know, I've discovered a wonderful poet. Okay, I'm here for this film, and as a consequence, I've been reading stuff. So there's this wonderful poet that was a partisan with my dad. My dad was involved in saving his life, called Avram Sutzkever. I gave a class about him. Harold, I think you were there. Sutzkever was not a Zionist. He was a lover of nature, of his own people. He was committed profoundly to Yiddish. And he was an Israeli citizen, right? I don't know why I'm mentioning Sutzkever, but Sutzkever, in my eyes, was a mensch. And every person who can be a mensch can be a potential for light around him.
Yeah.
I sound like a rabbi. I'm being preachy. I apologize for that. That's what I do, you know.
Nancy asks, has Rabbis for Human Rights as a group taken a position on the bombing of Gaza, or does the group tend to take a more low-key profile, perhaps on political issues? That's what I mean.
It was up on screen. I didn't read it. It was a statement. I was here dealing with a film. I didn't even respond to all the roundabouts that went on.
Right, okay.
The Rabbis for Human Rights had a petition out, and people were interviewed saying we're calling for a cessation of the violence, and we condemn the attack on civilian populations. And it was, I mean, it didn't condemn the bombing on Gaza, it condemned the bombing on civilians, which means both, you know, both national groups.
Now I've got this from Ahmed. Isn't the existence of Israel against Judaism? Isn't killing, torturing, and abusing innocent people against Judaism?
Those are two different things. Can I look?
Yes.
Torture. What was the second part?
Isn't killing, torturing, and abusing innocent people against Judaism?
Well, it's as much against Judaism as it is against Islam, and it goes on in the Muslim world. I sound like a right-wing guy, but I mean, I know of torture under Hamas and killing under Hamas. That's how they rule in Gaza. They destroyed, their opposition, and there are jails, and people are rotting in jails in Hamas land. Having said that, of course, and there's a lot of material about, a testimony a person gives who's been tortured is not acceptable in a Jewish Beit Din either. The first part of the question, whether a Jewish state is opposed to Judaism, that is nonsense. I mean, the Jewish religion formed around a longing to have a homeland. It's central. And I sound like Zionist propaganda, but it's there. It's not. I'm not making it up at every wedding, and I've done 150 weddings, not recognized because I'm not an Orthodox rabbi. If I forget the O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. What's that about? We didn't make up the connection with Jerusalem, and when people say that is a lie. Okay, and there are a lot of lies flying around because of propaganda. And you know what? I was profoundly upset in a tent when I was in reserve duty once in Israel when someone talked about how Palestinians were pushed across in '67, trucked some of them to the other side. I said, I've been lied to in Habonim by the labor Zionists and so on. But the number of lies I've heard from Palestinian extremists on screen and in digital is incredible. There was no Jewish temple. Well, that is such bullshit. There's never been a Jewish connection with the Holy Land. That is crap. Excuse the language, I'm a rabbi, but it's just not true. And the return of Jews to the Holy Land, to the land of Israel, preceded Herzl. You want something else surprising? Even Jabotinsky, the right-wing Zionist, and certainly Herzl, envisaged a country in which, I don't remember whether it was the prime minister would be Arab and the president Jewish or the other way around. They envisaged a liberal democracy. There was a very significant student of Jewish mysticism, Gershom Scholem, who talked about the dangers of a messianic side to Judaism, which is something that if you take the cork out of the bottle, you don't know what you're going to get. Right, and some of that has happened.
Yes, the type of Jewish presence in Palestine wasn't necessarily, in the early days, wasn't necessarily the creation of a state. That happened in other ways as things progressed.
Yeah, well, the first people who started coming when modern world opened up and people could move around and didn't stay in their own village for hundreds and hundreds of years and started to travel with a steamship and all the rest of it, was to settle a land because it's a mitzvah. If you're a religious Jew, it is a mitzvah to go live in Israel. And that wasn't made up by the Zionist movement. I mean, why do you see these scenes of these Ethiopian Jews, these Yemenite Jews kissing the soil when they arrive? It's not for JNF, it's not for propaganda, it's real.
Jackie has written, veShalom and Human Rights Watch have reported on the worsening apartheid situation. So veShalom recently, Haggai Elad, I think it was, wrote an article recently about the situation in the West Bank and says that he wants to call it apartheid. And Human Rights Watch, I'm not sure that either of them have actually labeled it South African apartheid, but they've made comparisons to it. So Jackie asks, how does one best fight this apartheid situation from Australia? So perhaps your thoughts on the idea of apartheid itself, which you've already made some comments about, and how one deals with at least what they are talking about, because there is this separation and there is different treatment of Palestinians compared to Israelis in both the West Bank and or perhaps less so in Gaza, because Gaza is ruled by Hamas.
I can't tell Australian Jews how to behave as against the situation. I just can't. I mean, come and get involved, join the Israeli left, bolster the people who are pushing the other way. We need you on the ground. Apartheid can be a useful word to understand some things, but it can also blind you to what's on the ground. It's a military occupation of another population that doesn't want that military occupation and is under the protection of that military occupation. There are people colonizing and taking over land. If that's apartheid, then it's apartheid. There are two systems of law. That's true. That is true. And that's very serious abrogation of basic human rights. Look, I'm an Israeli. I try to avoid buying products from settlements that I feel are based on theft, on grazing goats on someone else's land. I don't try not to buy milk and yogurt from that crowd. And I do it based not on a political thing, and some Israelis do, but on a religious thing. It's not kosher. Anything that's stolen isn't kosher. Heschel talked about that sort of thing, dealing with exploitation of workers in California. And I accept that, we limit what kosher or not kosher is to something very narrow. And we can expand that concept. There are people who do.
Gilda, we've probably had close on half an hour of a bit of backwards and forwards.
Yes.
How are we doing time?
Well, I think it's time for us, I think, to call this meeting to a close. So if anybody has any last questions to ask the rabbi, now would be the time to put them forward. And while you do that, I just want to say thank you on behalf of AJDS for all of you during lockdown and on a Sunday night, which is always a bit difficult, for taking the time, for joining us. And I hope this is going to be the first of, please keep a lookout on our website, which will be up and running very shortly, and on our Facebook page. And if you want me to add you to our MailChimp for our future forums that are going to be coming up at least once a month from now on, and hope they just grow in popularity. And thank you so much. And thank you so much, Rabbi. I know you've been incredibly busy with your filming and You've got an incredibly hectic schedule. We've had to speak at some pretty odd times to organize this. Thank you for taking the time. Now is a very, very difficult period to be discussing an issue like this. And I can see by some of the comments, there's lots of anger, there's lots of frustration, there's lots of questions. And it's a very hard topic. So thank you so much for being informative, enlightening, patient, calm, and for joining the AJDS. And to everybody who is here this evening that isn't a member, please think about becoming a member. I think the work we do is still vitally important, and we can only grow from strength to strength. So feel free to contact me at any time and we can have a chat about it. So on behalf of AJDS, thank you for being here this evening.
You're welcome, my pleasure, and b'atzlacha, as we say. You're chazak v'ametz.
Thanks,
I mean,
Yehiel.
in the
Thank
broad
you, everybody.
sense, it's the same cause everywhere in the world.
Yes, so you're here till middle of June, was it, or about the 8th or something?
21st. We
21st,
extended
okay.
it. It's been extended.
Okay. I hope everybody in your family is well in Israel at the moment.
Yeah, they're doing okay. They're a little shook up. They've been there before.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, I have somebody from France. Rosette Rosenberg said, thanks, love from France. That's interesting.
Yeah, and hi to Gail. I didn't say it before. She's a big supporter of Rabbis For Human Rights and came out to visit the Bedouin with me. And I appreciate her support. And Arnold, I'm honored to have you here because I really enjoy your writing profoundly.
Arnold,
Hi, Yehhiel. I've been given permission to unmute, so
yes.
I just wanted to say hi.
Hi. Yeah.
I'm just wondering if we still have a few minutes. I really wanted to hear what you had to say about, the predictability of these intifadas. And I mean, in my view, there needs to be an educational effort that's larger than what Rabbis for Human Rights has been able to do. And I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, our budget is 3 million shekels. It's nothing, right? And in
Right.
order to do real educational work, you need more. And we're not getting any public or government money. Yeah, you're right. I think rounds of violence are predictable because you've got a repressed national group who want their freedom. And you've got a traumatized, and anyone who says Jews aren't traumatized doesn't know anything about Jews, a traumatized group who also want their freedom. They want their freedom from fear and war. And so when one side decides they're going to open fire, the other side is going to react, and around we go.
And where do you see a political shift happening, and how do you see that happening? Because right now, the right wing is pretty entrenched.
Yeah, well, some people say the only solution, I think B.Ecops has taken that approach, comes from outside. But, I don't know, I'm no great scholar of international relations. I think you need both. I think there's not going to be a change until there's a profound change of heart in Israel, which isn't right around the corner at the moment, and a change of tactics on the part of Palestinians. Because it's not shooting missiles because people abused in one way or another locally didn't lead to any, in my opinion, political achievement on the part of Palestinians either. So we're going to be going on being stuck until there's profound change of heart, and international involvement to change things won't happen until people on the ground really want to be part of that process. So it could happen tomorrow morning. I believe in miracles. I mean, I love something that was Professor Schulman, Debbie works at the Israel Academy of Sciences, has worked with, wonderful guy who came out to Sheikh Jarrah when we were demonstrating there. And he wrote an essay, or he was interviewed. He said, he made a distinction between optimism and hope. I'm not an optimist, certainly not regarding the near future. Hope is something about what keeps you moving and doing despite the situation. The national anthem of Israel is Hatikva, the hope. And for time being, it's excluding Arab Palestinians, but it's not a militaristic song. So I still have hope. I still have hope.
Thanks. I'm going to end the meeting now. Thanks to
Okay.
everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
everyone.
Yehhiel.
Thanks, everyone.
Lovely seeing
Bye
all.
from Canada.
Keep well, stay sane.
Sehr gesund.